Have you ever imagined being arrested and thrown in jail, without a trial, without a lawyer, and without even knowing what you did wrong? Sounds impossible in America, right? Well, it actually happened, ordered by none other than President Abraham Lincoln himself. During one of the darkest times in U.S. history, Lincoln made a decision that shocked the nation. He suspended one of the oldest and most sacred rights, habeas corpus, the right that protects you from being locked up unfairly. It was a move that many called unconstitutional, yet Lincoln claimed it was the only way to save the country from falling apart. But why did he do it? What pushed a president known for his honesty and fairness to take away a core American freedom? The answer lies in fear, chaos, and the desperate fight to hold the Union together during the Civil War. Stick with me until the end of this video, because by the time we're done, you'll see how one decision changed not just the war, but the very idea of liberty in America. The year was 1861. America was tearing itself apart. 11 southern states had left the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The Civil War had begun, and no one knew if the United States would even survive. In Washington, D.C., President Abraham Lincoln stood at the center of a storm. The nation he swore to protect was collapsing. Trains carrying Union troops were being blocked by angry mobs. Bridges were being burned. Telegraph lines, the main way to send urgent messages, were being cut. And rebel sympathizers were everywhere, even in the nation's capital. To make things worse, many people in the border states like Maryland openly supported the South. If Maryland joined the Confederacy, Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by enemy territory. Lincoln knew that if that happened, the Union government could fall before the war even truly began. Imagine that pressure, leading a nation at war with itself, unsure who you could trust, and watching rebellion spread faster than you could stop it. Lincoln faced an impossible choice: protect individual rights or protect the country itself. But before we go deeper, it's important to understand one key thing. The right he decided to suspend wasn't just any law. It was habeas corpus, a Latin term meaning, "you shall have the body." In simple words, it means the government can't hold you in jail without showing a real reason. It's one of the oldest and most important safeguards of personal freedom, going back to English law centuries before America was even born. By the time Lincoln took office, this right was part of the U.S. Constitution. It was seen as sacred, untouchable. And yet, as rebellion spread, Lincoln began to wonder, could the Constitution survive if the country itself was destroyed? That question would soon lead to one of the boldest and most controversial decisions in American history. Before we go further, let's slow down for a moment, because understanding habeas corpus is the key to understanding Lincoln's decision. So, what exactly does this strange Latin phrase mean? Habeas corpus literally translates to "you shall have the body." In simple terms, it means that if someone is arrested, the government must bring them before a judge and explain why they're being held. It's the rule that stops anyone, even a president, from locking people up just because they want to. Think of it as a shield for personal freedom. It protects every citizen from unfair arrest and abuse of power. If the government can't show a good reason for keeping you in jail, the court must let you go. It's one of the oldest rights in the English-speaking world, older than the United States itself. This principle was carried from English common law into the U.S. Constitution, where it's written in Article 1, Section 9, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended," where when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. That single line is important. It gives a small exception, in times of rebellion or invasion. But here's the catch: the Constitution doesn't clearly say who has the power to suspend it, Congress or the President. When Lincoln came to power, this gray area would become a constitutional battlefield. To him, the nation was already in rebellion. Cities were burning, soldiers were attacked, and the government was under threat. In his mind, public safety required immediate action. So, when he decided to suspend habeas corpus, Lincoln believed he was using the power the Constitution quietly allowed. But not everyone agreed. To many Americans, it felt like a betrayal, the president breaking the very law he swore to defend. And soon, his bold move would set off a wave of outrage resistance, and one of the fiercest debates in American history. By the spring of 1861, Abraham Lincoln's presidency was barely beginning, and already the nation was collapsing around him. The Civil War had erupted. Southern states were seceding one after another, claiming they no longer recognized the authority of the United States. Lincoln's government was in chaos. Washington, D.C., the heart of the Union, felt more like a city under siege. Soldiers were being attacked on their way to defend the capital. Pro-Confederate mobs in Baltimore, Maryland, tore up railroad tracks and destroyed bridges to block Union reinforcements. Telegraph lines, the main way to communicate, were being cut by Southern sympathizers. It wasn't just war on the battlefield. It was war within the Union. Lincoln feared spies, saboteurs, and traitors were hiding in plain sight, among his own citizens. Now imagine the situation through his eyes, the capital nearly isolated, states rebelling, and even local officials refusing to cooperate. Every hour counted. If he couldn't keep supply lines open and control Maryland, the Union itself might not survive the month. Under that kind of pressure, Lincoln faced an impossible choice. Should he protect civil liberties at all costs, even if it meant losing the war? Or should he act fast, even if it meant bending the Constitution? Lincoln decided that the greatest threat wasn't breaking the law, it was losing the nation that the law was meant to protect. He believed the Constitution wasn't a suicide pact, it was a living framework built to defend the country in its darkest hours. So, as riots and rebellion spread, he reached for extraordinary powers. He gave the military permission to arrest anyone suspected of helping the enemy, without a warrant, without a hearing, without a trial. It was a move that shocked the country, and marked the beginning of one of the boldest actions any American president had ever taken. As the Union trembled on the edge of collapse, Abraham Lincoln made a choice that would echo through history. In April 1861, after riots in Baltimore threatened to cut off Washington from the rest of the North, he quietly gave the military the authority to suspend habeas corpus along the rail lines between Philadelphia and the capital. That meant soldiers could arrest anyone they suspected of aiding the Confederacy, no judge, no trial, no questions asked. To Lincoln, it wasn't an act of tyranny. It was survival. He believed the Constitution itself allowed it. The country was facing a rebellion, just as the Constitution's clause had described. If the Union fell, he reasoned, the Constitution would die with it. What good were rights on paper if there was no nation left to protect them? Lincoln put it bluntly in one of his letters, "Are all the laws but one to go unexecuted, and the government itself go to pieces, lest that one be violated?" In his eyes, it was better to break one law than to lose the entire system of laws. To him, suspending habeas corpus wasn't a betrayal, it was an emergency measure to save democracy itself. Soon, military commanders began arresting suspected Confederate sympathizers, newspaper editors spreading rebellion, and even local politicians accused of disloyalty. Thousands were detained. Some were guilty. Many were not. But Lincoln believed it was a necessary price to pay. To his supporters, Lincoln was defending the Union with courage. To his critics, he was turning into a dictator. The line between protecting the nation and abusing power had never looked thinner. But Lincoln wasn't done. As the arrests mounted and outrage spread, one man, the most powerful judge in America, would publicly challenge him. And that's when the real constitutional battle began. Lincoln's bold decision to suspend habeas corpus didn't stay quiet for long. Word spread fast, and soon the country was on fire with debate. Was the president saving the Union, or destroying the very freedoms it stood for? Critics were furious. Newspapers accused Lincoln of acting like a king. Politicians warned that he had set a dangerous precedent, that if one man could take away such a fundamental right, then no one's liberty was truly safe. Even some of his own supporters were uneasy. They agreed the nation needed protection, but not at the cost of the Constitution. The loudest voice of opposition came from Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, the same man behind the infamous Dred Scott decision just a few years earlier. Taney ruled that only Congress, not the president, had the power to suspend habeas corpus. In his view, Lincoln had broken the law. Taney's opinion came during the case of Ex parte Merriman, where a Maryland man had been arrested by the military without a warrant. Taney ordered him released. But Lincoln ignored the order. He didn't respond, didn't apologize, he simply carried on. To Lincoln, the stakes were too high for hesitation. He believed the Constitution's silence on who could suspend habeas corpus gave him the right to act when Congress was not in session. Waiting for lawmakers could mean losing the war. And so he chose action over caution. Still, the controversy didn't fade. Every arrest, every silenced newspaper, and every citizen detained without trial added fuel to the fire. Americans were divided. Some saw Lincoln as the savior of the Union, others as the enemy of liberty. And yet, amid the chaos and criticism, one thing was certain: the president's gamble had changed the balance of power forever. As the Civil War dragged on, the tension around Lincoln's actions only grew stronger. People wanted clarity. Could the president truly suspend habeas corpus? Or had he gone too far? The answer finally began to take shape in 1863. When Congress stepped in. By this point, thousands of civilians had been arrested under Lincoln's orders. Some were accused of spying or helping the Confederacy. Others were simply critics of the government, newspaper editors, or outspoken protesters. Families were demanding answers, courts were overwhelmed, and the political pressure was reaching a breaking point. Lincoln knew he needed legal backing. So in March 1863, Congress passed the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act. This law gave the president the official authority to suspend habeas corpus during the rebellion, something he had already been doing for nearly 2 years. It also gave protection to Union officers and soldiers who had made arrests under his earlier orders. In essence, Congress legalized what Lincoln had already done. The law declared that, in times of rebellion or invasion, the president could authorize the arrest of anyone suspected of disloyal practices. But it also required the government to present a list of detainees to the courts, a small attempt to bring some accountability. This act marked a turning point. For the first time, Lincoln's extraordinary actions were no longer just presidential orders. They were supported by the nation's lawmakers. To his supporters, it was proof that his instincts had been right all along. To his critics, it was proof that fear had pushed America to rewrite its own rules. But one thing was undeniable: by 1863, Lincoln's power had expanded farther than any president before him. The Civil War had reshaped not only the country's borders but also the very limits of presidential authority. By the time the Civil War ended in 1865, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus had already become one of the most debated actions in American history. It had helped the Union survive, but at a tremendous cost to individual freedom. Thousands of citizens had been arrested without trial. Some were spies, smugglers, or Confederate supporters. But others were ordinary people, journalists who criticized the government, or citizens who simply spoke out against the war. Many of them spent months in military prisons without ever being charged. To Lincoln, these sacrifices were necessary. He believed the nation's survival outweighed personal liberty, at least in that moment of crisis. And in a way, he was right. The Union did survive. His firm leadership helped keep the country together when it was falling apart. But the moral question lingered: can freedom truly survive if the government takes away the very rights that define it? That question haunted America long after the war ended. Even today, historians still argue over whether Lincoln's choice was justified. Some view him as a visionary leader who used extraordinary power to save democracy. Others see him as a constitutional violator, a man who crossed a dangerous line in the name of necessity. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. Lincoln himself once said that he acted out of necessity, not choice. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes, leadership demands hard decisions where every option feels wrong. His suspension of habeas corpus remains a turning point in American law and history. It forced the nation to confront a timeless struggle: the balance between freedom and security, between rights and survival. Because in the end, Lincoln didn't just fight to save the Union. He forced America to ask what kind of country it wanted to be. In the end, Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus was more than a wartime decision. It was a test of America's soul. It asked a question that still echoes today: how much freedom are we willing to give up to stay safe? Lincoln faced an impossible situation. The nation was bleeding, rebellion was spreading, and time was running out. To him, breaking one law to save the Union was better than watching the entire system collapse. He saw his actions not as tyranny, but as duty, a painful necessity to preserve the government that gave life to the Constitution itself. Yet, history refuses to give a simple answer. Some remember him as the savior of democracy, the man who risked everything to keep the United States alive. Others remember him as a president who pushed the limits of power, proving that even the noblest leaders can blur the line between protection and control. What's undeniable is that Lincoln's choice changed the presidency forever. It showed that in times of crisis, the executive branch could expand its reach far beyond normal limits, a legacy that would shape future wars, emergencies, and national debates for generations. So, was he right? Was suspending habeas corpus an act of courage or an abuse of power? Maybe the real answer lies not in the past, but in how we respond to crisis today. Because every time fear tests freedom, America faces that same question again: how much liberty can we sacrifice to survive? And that's why Lincoln's story still matters. It's not just history. It's a mirror reflecting the hardest truth about democracy. Sometimes even freedom itself hangs by a thread. So now that you've heard the story, what do you think? Was Lincoln a hero who saved the Union? Or a leader who crossed the line in the name of power? History isn't just about the past, it's about the choices we face today. Every nation in every era has moments when safety and liberty collide. Lincoln's decision reminds us that freedom isn't guaranteed. It's something we must protect, even when times get dark. If you've watched this far, you already care about history, not just the names and dates, but the real human choices behind them. So stay with this channel, because we'll keep exploring those powerful moments that shape the world we live in. Hit like if this story made you think deeper about the meaning of freedom. Subscribe if you want more untold truths from American history, the struggles, the decisions, and the lessons that still matter today. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Lincoln's shoes, what would you have done? Suspend the right to habeas corpus to save the nation, or protect liberty no matter the cost? Your answer might just tell us what kind of America you believe in. Because in the end, history isn't just about what they did. It's about what we learn from it.